I'm Grim.
I'm Zolgar. That's Kaiju.
And this is Two Idiots and a Dog. Idiots on Film.
Where we explore movies that we love.
Or think are important for pop culture.
Alright, so this week we are doing one of Grim's favorite movies. That would be The Mummy from 2017.
I will kill you?
Okay, in all seriousness, that would be the 1999 version of The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser and quite a number of other great actors.
Richard Weiss, John Hannah, Kevin J. O'Connor, Oded Fair,
Arnold Vosloo.
Just an amazing cast. And we chose The Mummy for a multitude of reasons. There is, of course, the standing Tumblr joke of how this was the great millennial gay awakening. But in all seriousness, this movie is a fun ride from start to finish, with an amazing cast, and it's one of those pulpy, schlocky films that you just don't see anymore. And we will have a discussion on that later in this episode, I think, because I think it warrants discussion. But it's just fun, top-notch cast. Honestly, the characters and cast of this make this work so well that you are more than happy to sit back and ignore the fact that there's really no plot.
There is a plot. It's just full of holes bigger than Tucson city streets.
We'll get into that a little bit more, but before we do,
a quick word from our sponsors.
Hey, Zolgar. We should start thinking about the future of Two Idiots and a Dog.
We should. But that takes effort.
And we are just a couple of idiots. We shouldn't be allowed to decide anything.
Got a great idea. Let's sucker our listeners into doing the thinking for us.
Okay, but how would that work?
Simple. Listener survey.
That's so stupid, it might just work.
If you like what we do, we would love to hear your thoughts on the future of Two Idiots and a Dog. We've put together a listener survey, less than 20 questions about the future of the project.
All questions are optional, and we don't collect any personal information.
It should only take a few minutes of your time, and you can help make Two Idiots and a Dog better.
You can find a link to the survey in the description of this episode.
You can also find it on our social media pages and Discord server.
So, The Mummy.
Are you my mummy?
Wrong franchise! See what I have to work with. God.
Well, let's just address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, okay, there's a lot of good in this movie. But there are... shall we call them foibles? Missteps?
There are a lot of places in this movie that it definitely shows the fact that it was made in 1999 for a predominantly white American audience.
Yeah, kidding aside, tiptoeing a little bit aside, I'm just going to come out and say it. As a movie based in pulp, schlocky origins, it's pretty much entirely predicated on colonialist pillaging of ancient cultures. Specifically, in this case, of course, Egypt. The version of Egypt we're shown is very much the Hollywood Egypt, whether that's in the architecture, cultural norms, or, frankly, just the cast, which is whiter than snow.
Yeah, of all of the characters that are supposed to be Egyptian, at least major characters that we actually have a name for, not one of them is actually played by an Egyptian. So Evie is, of course, half Egyptian. She is definitely white European. Imhotep, like the guy who is straight up Egyptian priest, is so he's actually technically from Africa, but he is very, very much European descent.
Yeah, specifically from South Africa, I believe, which is heavy Dutch and Germanic.
He's Dutch,
background.
German, etc.
Yeah. And this does mean that we have a whole lot of Egyptian stuff going on with no actual Egyptians in sight. And even let me put it this way, I think the darkest skin tone we see in a prominent character is Ankh Sunamun, and she is Venezuelan?
Yeah, she was Venezuelan. And there's also, of course, Ardeth, who's a little bit darker, but he's Israeli.
Yeah, Oded Fair is Israeli.
Several the characters we see, major characters we see that are darker are Israeli or Iranian.
Yeah, which is, there's problems there. There's also if this is the kind of thing that does bother you in your characterizations within storytelling, there is some misogyny as a fair warning. However, it is not part of the narrative. It is specifically characters within that narrative. The narrative sides with our leading lady.
There is a small amount of misogyny built into the narrative. And that is in the way, while she is a strong character of her own right and very important to the story and ends up, responsible for saving the day, Evie also does kind of exist as a plot device in terms of being her existence, well, again, strong independent of the rest of the characters. She also does... Things happen to her to drive the story.
I mean, yes and no. Like that, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, so we're clear. But when those things happen, she's not a passive force in those things happening around her. She actively participates in the story and isn't just a set piece for these things to happen to.
That is true, but I still think there's certain elements of the... Going back to the fact that this is pulp, one of the major things in the pulp genre does tend to be the misogyny inherent in the entire archetype of the genre, and I don't think this completely escapes it. Well, it does better than a lot of them do. I'm looking at you, Indiana Jones, but
I mean. And again, this isn't to defend it or anything, but, name a movie from the 90s that did.
I mean, fair.
Heck, we still have a lot of movies today that straight up don't. It's a problem. That said, this is one of the less egregious examples of it.
And I will definitely agree there.
And the narrative does tend to side with our heroine. Any time there's a character that calls into question her capabilities or her intelligence or her qualifications for being in the thick of things, the narrative immediately shows us, yeah, absolutely, she deserves to be here. She belongs to here, and that character that just denigrated her is an idiot.
They're led by a woman. What does a woman know?
And then we cut to her just doing a rundown on the statue of Anubis and all the important cool stuff and what the markings mean and this, that, and everything else, and showing that she is an expert in her field. And I think that that's very important, narratively speaking, that this narrative does support her, and that anytime we do see these misogynistic characters, they are, typically speaking, portrayed to be on the wrong side of the narrative. One exception is the Pharaoh in the prologue, where Aung San Moon is basically his property. Well, no, basically about it. She is his property. And the narrative doesn't do a really good job of necessarily pointing a finger at that and going, that's bad, because that's bad. And if you're hearing it first here, I got nothing.
Except the narrative kind of does. Because, first of all, she is willing to risk her death to stand up to him and to be with the person she loves, and she turns to his guards after she kills him and says, my body is no longer his temple, and kills herself.
Yeah, but her side is shown to be the bad side in the narrative. I mean, as an extrapolated analysis, we can always sit here and be like, yeah, Imhotep really didn't do anything that bad in the prologue. Some of the later stuff, problematic. Little problematic. Imhotep, your problematic fave.
But let me ask you this. Okay, so we have Imhotep.
Mm-hmm.
Is Imhotep really the villain?
Yes and no.
Because does he have control over what he is doing to regain his physical form after being cursed?
Regaining his form, definitely not. The things with Evie, totally him. I'm laying that at his feet.
That's on him, yes.
But the curse did, the markings on the chest did kind of make it clear that he, by sacred law, would be compelled to consummate the curse. So, but there's other things he did, like he could have just consummated the curse. Instead, he actively is summoning the plagues of Egypt and mind controlling that crowd, and like there's a lot of things he does that are.
Of course, also we do have to consider that he spent 3,000 years with some semblance of being alive, locked in a sarcophagus, being eaten by scarabs.
Fun times. I guess we've kind of already been discussing a little bit, but I guess that's our segue into characters here, because the characters are what make this movie. Full stop. Yeah. The narrative is, as much as I love this movie, this narrative is weaker than spicy food made for a white person. Like,
yeah, the narrative of this movie, if you stop for 2 minutes and actually think about it, oh dear God.
Yeah, there's several moments where it's just like, why did you do that? No, don't do. Why did you do that? Like, there are certain actions and elements of the story that come together that straight up come together because the narrative needs to keep going and no other reason.
Yeah.
And once you make your peace with that, it's a fun, great movie.
But it sounds like we're getting into the narrative when we wanted to talk about characters.
That's very true, we did. And let's start with our main crew here. We've got the first that we meet of our main crew is Rick O'Connell, played by Brendan Fraser.
Which, this was kind of his breakout role of showing us that he was more than just the dumb, pretty face.
Yeah.
That tended to be what he played.
And he was a pretty face. Let me tell you. This was Brendan Fraser in his peak. Now, I've seen recent pictures of the man. He is still gorgeous. And I will die on that hill. But this was a young, in his prime Brendan Fraser when even Hollywood was fawning over him. And as we all know, Hollywood is fickle and shallow as hell. And here he is playing this slightly more rugged character, competent, physically empowered, and not stupid. He was quick to adapt to the changing situation. He started off things going, yeah, supernatural weirdness is totally happening, because he sees some of it in the prologue when the sands form a giant face at his feet, and he goes, no, I think I'm going to leave here now. And Rick O'Connell is, on the surface, you look at him and go, okay, there's the meat shield. And then you watch the movie play out, and you're like, oh, there's more going on here.
Yeah, he is still definitely the fighter of the group. He is the muscle. He is the one who you turn to when you're like, hey, that thing over there, that needs to die.
Yeah.
But he is smart, he is clever, he is fairly charismatic, and he's also not above a little bit of skullduggery.
Yeah, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty in both the combat and shady way, but he also isn't utterly unrepentant. He has a code, he has rules, he doesn't want to kill anybody he doesn't have to. I mean, let's take a look at some of the mob scenes, like when they're in the car trying to drive away with the last cowboy. He straight up could have just gone guns blazing into that entire crowd. But he knows that they're not in full control of themselves, and he and Jonathan are primarily, even Ardeth, are primarily using hand-to-hand and unarmed strikes to punch them or knock them out or inflict damage, but nothing lethal.
Their entire goal is get them off the car.
Yeah. And that speaks a lot to his character. And we have our other protagonists, Evie and Jonathan. Evie, played by Rachel Weiss, who is a librarian, as she proudly proclaims in a drunken scene later.
A rather bumbling librarian, but also extremely competent in her area of expertise.
She is what I would call awkward and clumsy, with a penchant for misfortune, but she's incredibly intelligent, incredibly knowledgeable, knows multiple languages, can decipher hieroglyphs, and I cannot remember what the other word... I don't know. Apologies to any anthropologists in the audience. Neither of us are Egyptologists.
Nope. But I still know that prologue was highly inaccurate.
Yeah, a little bit. So, we've got her brother Jonathan, who is this kind of scoundrel, roguey type.
Definitely chaotic good vibes.
Yeah, he's definitely like that get-rich-quick family member that everybody has, but he genuinely cares about his sister, and he genuinely cares about people in general. He's just a little impulsive, and his mouth tends to run ahead of his brain. But that doesn't make him stupid. He exhibits intelligence in multiple instances, like when they're talking about the old legends, the Hominoptera, like he recognizes and understands what's being talked about because it's part of his upbringing as well, because their parents were patrons of the museum, and their father was this great explorer, and so he had collected all these legends.
Their mother was an explorer too, though.
And also Egyptian herself.
Yes.
It would have been very easy for them to pigeonhole him as just the coward. And to an extent he is. Like, he doesn't go face first into the thick of it, but when he is in the thick of it, he's in.
He's not a coward. He is someone with a strong sense of caution that tries to avoid danger, but when he is in danger, he functions. He does not shy away from it when it happens. Yeah. And that is the difference between a coward and someone who is cautious.
Yeah, like if you've got like a blade to him, he'll immediately start trying to talk his way out of it, But if it comes down to no, it's time to throw down, he's got a pistol in hand. And he's holding it steady. And there's actually a fan theory making the rounds. I mentioned this in the note session a little bit. Discussing that given his age and location and setting and everything, we know that Rick served in the war. World War I.
The Great War.
It would make sense that Jonathan did as well, and that context puts a lot of Jonathan's character into sharp detail. His macabre sense of humor, his genuine concern for the lives of those around him, and also his kind of cavalier attitude about his own mortality. He doesn't want to die, but it might happen, and kind of that whole millennial attitude that we've got going on, where it's just like, we don't really want to die, but it's probably going to happen at some point, so whatever.
There is a very important note that must be made here. My dog is incredibly cute.
She is. She is absolutely adorable. Criminally so.
Back on track.
We've got Oded Fair playing Ardeth Bey, who spends the first half of the movie as a little bit of an antagonist.
Who also, in the entire film, never gets named.
A lot of these characters don't. The Egyptologist has an actual name, and we never hear it in the movie. Ardeth is one of the Magi.
You mean the Magi?
Yeah, our subtitles horribly misspelled that word repeatedly. So, they're a secretive organization that for 3,000 years has been trying to keep the mummy under wraps.
Do we want to cover any more characters before we get into that?
We do. We'll come back to that, but the only reason I'm bringing it up now is to put Ardeth in picture here. He's this... Later on, he becomes an ally, and one hell of an ally at that. He face tanks an entire mob of mummies, and comes out the other side of it with like a few scratches.
Yeah, we're set up to think that he is doing the heroic sacrifice thing, and
then we get one final jump scare when he taps Jonathan on the shoulder and gives him a heart attack. Like, thank you! Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I needed.
This movie did like its jump scares.
It did. And Ardeth is this mostly stoic character, and we don't really get to know much about him until like the last part of the movie, and even then we don't get to know much about him. In this movie, he's very much supporting character, but it's an important supporting character. And then, of course, we've got Imhotep himself.
Now, the one place where we do see Ardeth not being stoic, though, is the airplane ride, where he is having a blast.
Yeah, just grinning like a dog on a car ride.
It's like, this is fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, Imhotep.
Imhotep, Mr. Vosloo did a fantastic job portraying him.
Yeah, he
spends a lot of the movie kind of looking over at Ardeth's stoic routine and going, "You are like little baby, hold my beer." It's like, just face passive, stalking forward, Terminator style. But the moments where we do get emotive moments from him are some of the most compelling, because at the end of the day, we have a compelling villain. His motivations are completely understandable. He wanted to be with the woman he loved. His boss wouldn't let him do it, and was controlling and manipulating, so they killed him, and he tried to resurrect his dead girlfriend and was arrested, cursed, tortured for 3,000 years, finally gets out, gets his mojo back, wants to get his girl back, and that's his whole motivation, and that is an entirely understandable motivation. His methodology is a little on the, villainous side, but like, we can all understand the wanting to be with the person we love and care about. Like, that's a very human motivation for an inhuman monster. We have to bring up Aung San Suu Kyi, his girlfriend.
The Venezuelan.
Yeah, she plays a critical role without actually being around much. It's a little bit woman in the fridge, but
she's definitely fridged. She really is. She's fridged twice.
She's fridged twice, man. And then,
no, actually, she is fridged 3 times.
Oh, that's true, because they interrupted the ritual.
Yeah, they had just started to... She had
three times in one movie. That is impressive levels of fridging.
That might be a record.
Fridgeception. Like we said, this movie does have some problems, but it's still a fun ride. And then we have the warden who tags along, who is this really scuzzy, kind of scoundrelly character, played expertly by Omid Jalili. If I mispronounced that, I heartily apologize. Fantastic performance, everything it needed to be. His actual name, by the way, is Warden Gad Hassan. He does have a name. It is also never spoken the entire movie.
I think it is spoken once, but it's very briefly, and he is referred to as the warden for the rest of it, or he's mostly referred to as the warden.
Yeah.
Because I think at one point he is called Hassan.
Possibly, but if so, I missed it. And then we've got the Americans, played by a variety of very skilled actors. The one standout for me was Corey Johnson, who we saw in Hellboy as Agent Clay. And then, real quick, I gotta touch on my problematic fave. My real problematic fave, Benny. Benny is a self-serving, conniving, survivalist, greedy scoundrel rat. And I love him for it.
This is before he joined the Jets.
Get out. Get out. I'll finish the episode myself. I hate you so much.
But so Kevin J. O'Connor played that role so well.
Oh, he knocked it out of the park. The little sniveling mannerisms. He is the coward.
Yeah.
He is the coward that they could have made Jonathan be and did not. And the movie is better for it. I mean, we've got so many little things that come together to show us just how craven and opportunistic he is. We've got a straight-up admission on the boat that normally he leads them out to the desert and then leaves them to die, but these ones only paid him half, so he has to actually bring him back this time, which is just, dude, really? There's the fact that he very quickly joins Imhotep because he doesn't want to die, and he's getting paid a lot. And that scene in particular really does hammer home to me Benny's proclivities a little bit, because the scene starts, Imhotep approaching on him, and he's in full beef jerky mode at this point. He has not regenerated much. And Benny pulls out a cross and says a prayer to the Lord. And then he goes, no? Okay. And then pulls out this whole necklace of holy symbols and goes down the row one by one, uttering a prayer in each religion for that symbol.
Until he gets to a Star of David and starts speaking Hebrew, at which point Imhotep recognizes it as the language of the slaves.
As you recall, in ancient Egypt, the Jewish people were enslaved. So Hebrew would be their language when they weren't, doing slave work. Even though it's rooted in history, man, it's still just, ugh. And your dog is snoring. That's adorable.
It's very adorable.
She's also twitching. She's dreaming.
She's a good kaiju.
She's a very good kaiju. But he's not completely inhuman in his self-preservation. There are several moments he knows what Imhotep is, and there are several moments where we see it in his face where he's just like, he's not on board with this, but he kind of doesn't want to die.
Yeah, he's not on board with this, but he sees it as the lesser of two evils for himself. As he puts it to Rick, better at the right hand of the devil than in his way.
Yep. And we get some of the best moments with Benny, though. Some of the best lines of dialogue are straight up from Benny, or people talking to Benny. There's the recurring various ways of saying goodbye to Benny from Rick, which is funny, until we get just a little twinge of tragedy in the final one, when he's trapped in the tomb.
And Rick's just like, goodbye, Benny.
Yeah. There's the moment where, they're on the river. Hey, O'Connell, looks like I've got all the horses.
Hey, Benny, looks like you're on the wrong side of the river.
And then after the sandwall scene, he's just like, I love the sandwall thing, and the giant, and Imhotep's just walking away, and he's like, because two reasons. One, Imhotep ignores him in that whole scene, and second, Benny really does consider Rick a friend as much as a character like Benny can have friends. He will absolutely sell Rick out to save his own skin, but he still sees in Rick, like, that's somebody I know, that's somebody I went to war with. I ran away from that war and left him to die, but it's still somebody I know, and I do consider him a friend. It's just my definition of friend is a little, shall we say, flexible. And of course, Benny gets his. And it's brought up repeatedly, prophesized, foreshadowed repeatedly in dialogue with other characters. Rick's like, you're getting yours, Benny! You're gonna get yours!
Like I haven't heard that before.
And then later, Evie, people like you always get their comeuppance. Oh, really? Always. And he does exactly that. He gets sealed in a fit of poetic irony with the very treasure he wanted to loot.
Especially because he went back for seconds at least. So if he had been content with that first load he drug out, he would have been fine.
Yeah.
He could have gotten on that camel and gone. And
it is heavily implied in the sequel that the loot they took out of there set up their fortunes in the sequel. A little off topic because that's the sequel we're mostly just talking about here, but the fact is that's how much treasure he hauled out of there.
Yeah. He hauled out so much treasure, but that still wasn't enough.
Nope.
He went back for one more load.
And then he gets caught in there and
eaten by scarabs.
And eaten by scarabs. And he did it to himself twice over, because he did it through greed, going back in again and again and again. And he did it because his act of getting the treasure, he got tired, set the load of treasure over, and ended up throwing the switch that sank the city in the sand in the first place. He literally did it to himself. Honestly, I found Benny to be a more fun and compelling character than Imhotep himself. Imhotep was kind of just a walking plot device for most of this. But we spent a lot of time on the characters here because, well, they make the story happen. They are highlight. And a lot of that is some of the dialogue that we've been discussing. And those moments that just make it work. And then there's the story writing.
Oh, God. There's so much story. There's so many problems in the story writing. Again, this movie is very fun. This is a brain candy movie. You do not think about it. Because when you think about it, you see all of these stupid plot holes. Like, okay, I've said it quite a few times in the note session and such. The Magi are idiots. Look at when they attacked the boat.
Yeah,
that was so poorly planned, poorly executed. They could have just set the boat on fire from afar and sat on the riverbank with their rifles and shot anyone who came off the boat.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
It was... There's a few moments where they definitely handle things in not the best way. There's some elements where even our main cast are just kind of like, why are you doing that? Please stop. No, stop. No. Okay, well, I guess we're doing this now. The Americans made so many mistakes. Oh my god. Also, they were complete jerks.
Well, of course, as we talked about in the note session, the Americans existed to die in order to create a sense of tension by the timer on Imhotep regaining his full power.
Yeah. The story here is nothing to really to write home about, but it does give our characters something to do. And really, let's be honest, this movie, we're here for these characters. That's why we're here. These characters, the way they're written, the way they're portrayed, the way they're acted, the way they're directed. That's why we're here. The story is pulp schlocky nonsense. But it's fun pulp schlocky nonsense.
Yeah. In my notes, I have a note that basically says that this movie is ultra formulaic, but the pacing, the characters, and the dialogue writing make it so that formula just really works for it.
Yeah. Remember, just because a movie is formulaic doesn't make it bad. It's all about how you're using that formula, and they use the formula fairly effectively here. Is this the greatest movie ever? No, of course not. Absolutely not.
Is it in the top 100? Probably not.
It is, however, still one of my favorites because it is a fun, schlocky adventure that we don't get to see very much of anymore. We'll do like brief detours into pulpy schlock territory. And I guess that's our segue for discussing some of these elements and why we don't see them as much. The fact of the matter is, the pulp genre has some problems.
Yeah. Like we discussed earlier, the pulp genre, misogyny is a big part of it. Damsel in distress, woman in the fridge.
Yeah, it's a recurring problem.
Colonialism.
Rampant colonialism, especially anything involving the ancient cultures, for lack of a better word in this case, trope. Not that the ancient cultures themselves are a trope, but the way they're used and accessed, and it's always either ancient Egyptian or ancient native tribal, and we could do an entire podcast on just why that is so problematic. And if you're listening to this and you don't understand why that's problematic, Google is your friend. Yeah,
there are people much more educated than we are who can explain it. We will just kind of say that these things, they are heavily predicated on harmful stereotypes and very negative portrayals of cultures.
With a healthy dosing of flagrant appropriation.
Oh, so much appropriation.
Yeah.
And of course, also, one of the things that's very common in pulp that is kind of a problem these days to throw around is Nazis.
Yeah. Not in this movie, obviously, because this is pre-World War II.
Though that didn't stop Wonder Woman.
I mean, yeah. But that's another topic entirely, yeah. These days, not to get too political in this episode or anything, but there are certain problems with portrayals of Nazis today because some of their ideology is still prevalent in the world, and even portraying them as villains...
People are going to miss the point.
absolutely going to miss the point. The Fight Club effect. Just completely missing the point. And a lot of the problem with that is when you do villains, you want your villains to be portrayed as these cool, threatening, and there are people who will latch on to that for all the wrong reasons. And when it comes to Nazis, it's a problem because this ideology is real and it harms real people. And I think that's about as political as I want to get on that topic.
Yeah. And of course, also with your villains, and this is with Nazis, but it's with all your villains, you want your villains to also be somewhat identifiable, and when you start writing a character like that to also be identifiable, that just...
Yeah, I mean, let's take our two primary antagonists, Imhotep and Benny. These characters are completely identifiable. You can identify with and relate to these characters. One just wants to be reunited with his love, and the other just wants to survive and get paid.
Yeah, and, again, Imhotep did horrible things in pursuit of being reunited with his love, but if you tell me you wouldn't burn the world down to be with the person you love.
Yeah. And to be clear, we're not saying that's right. But
you can understand it.
It's human. Very human. Again, human motives for an inhuman creature, because honestly, really, by the time the main movie picks up, 3,000 years later, he is an inhuman monster by this point. And I don't just mean because he's a mummy. I mean because he's been tortured for 3,000 years. You would go a little bonkers too. So we don't see a lot of pulp anymore because these trademark elements are, as we become more culturally aware, as a society, as a people, as individuals, we realize these elements are exceedingly problematic and troubling and perpetuate harmful references to real people.
Yeah, and in part because of that, it makes these pulp movies really hard to do well. Because, okay, you look at this one. This is definitely one of the better done ones. And when you look at it from a critical standpoint, you're still, like we talked about in the start of this, still so many problems.
Yeah. And does that make it less enjoyable? For me personally, no, because I am aware of these problems and I'm willing to critically examine them. But that might not be the case for you. You might look at this and go, well, no, it's still too much for me. And that's okay. Everybody has individual tastes and everybody has an individual threshold for how much problematic content they can safely consume, and you're going to know your own mental state and threshold better than any of us would. We're just a couple of idiots.
And a dog.
A very adorable dog. Real quick, I want to touch on the visuals because there are some really gorgeous set pieces here, both panning vista shots, which you were kind of mad because you've lived in the desert your whole life, and really pretty stuff going on. Some of the sets were, while not accurate, very pretty.
Yeah. And honestly, that opening sequence of ancient Egypt...
yeah.
No, not accurate, but it was pretty.
It was very pretty, not accurate, super subtle on the imagery to let us know it was Egypt. For those who don't know, the opening shot of this movie is a sun behind a pyramid that pans back to show us the Sphinx. Okay? Not subtle at all.
I don't know. That maybe that was Southern California?
Vegas.
Vegas, baby.
Vegas. Also, real quick, I want to touch on some of the sound. The sound effects team did a fantastic job. While I wouldn't call everything accurate, they did create several recurring sound effects that every time you heard it, you're, gah. The scarabs, gah. Just gah. And the music didn't stand out on its own, but it also never took you out of the movie either. It always seemed to complement what was going on really well enough that it just kind of kept you in the movie. And that's The Mummy.
Yeah, but there is one thing that's bothering me about this movie.
What's that?
Why the fuck? If you're going to curse somebody, do you make it a curse that if they ever break free of it, they are a bloody god?
give white people something to do in Egypt?
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Two Idiots and a Dog.
If you like what we do, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/tiaadmedia.
That's TIAAD Media, all one word. If you want to send Kaiju fan mail or reach out to the idiots for anything, you can email us at tiaadmedia@gmail.com.
Again, that is tiaadmedia@gmail.com. You can also join us on Discord. Links can be found on Patreon in our email signature and on our SoundCloud page.
We would also like to give a special thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon.
Especially these idiots.
Random Warrior and Rain.
If you want to hear your name included here, you can support us at the Honorary Idiot tier on Patreon.